Are you ready to be the king of the Iron Fist tournament? Not me, but I'll certainly try. Even though I'm big into Super Smash Bros., a look at much of the content on Source Gaming should give that away, I'm not very big into the fighting game community. Not because of a lack of skill, well maybe a bit of that, but because I don't have the spare time to dedicate to a single game. And so because of that, fighting games are generally something I play a lot more casually, if I play them at all. But one member of the FGC that I do have a bit of a stronger attachment to is Tekken. And when I played it at Gamescom 2023, it was one of my games of the show, so I was quite keen to see how the final product turned out. My history with Tekken is pretty simple. I played the first 3 games and Tag Tournament on PS2, and then didn't touch the series again until Tag Tournament 2 on the Wii U, as it was one of the only games that it had at launch. However, thanks to friends who are more into fighting games than I am, I started playing Tekken 7 casually, and then eventually started getting into its competitive multiplayer a little bit, at least enough to have a main couple of fighters. But that's all I did with Tekken 7. I barely played any of the single player content because it wasn't that interesting. This might be, above all else, where Tekken 8 absolutely shines in comparison to its predecessors. The game is full of single player content to enjoy, as well as a ton of quality of life features to appeal to the competitive market. In my opinion, it is one of the very few fighting games to accomplish the goal of being appealing to every demographic, and I found it to be the best at doing so. Let's start with the single player content first, as this is where I spent most of my time. While Tekken 8's gameplay is always just fights, as one might expect, it somehow manages to have 3 entirely separate story modes for players to experience, providing a crazy amount of content for players to enjoy. The first is the main story mode, The Dark Awakens. This cinematic mode is the canon continuation of the ongoing Tekken storyline, the battle between the Mishima bloodline and the control of the devil gene that has cursed them. Tekken 7 also had a story mode, but I found it to be very dull and boring. From what I've heard, this seems to be a common opinion, and something Tekken 8 took to heart, as the story this time around might be one of the most bombastic shonen anime-ass plotlines I've ever experienced in a while. A tournament arc taking place in the Roman Colosseum, interpersonal struggles over the concept of power and the importance of friendship. One minute you have Jin lamenting over his weakness, and the next you have Paul and Law arguing over prize money in the middle of an active war zone, as a giant bear accidentally takes a missile to protect the guy he was attempting to take out himself. It's ludicrous, funny, and just plain cool at points. And unlike Tekken 7, I was really engrossed throughout. At its most basic, this story mode is just a series of fights, the majority of which you use Jin for, but you play this story for the narrative and cutscenes and music, which are all absolutely top-notch. And for anyone worried about being confused if this is their entry point to the series, the team was gracious enough to provide these incredibly brief but informative plot synopsis movies, explaining all the key points of the story so far that really helped me understand what the heck was going on, as well as what the dynamics were like between our hero Jin and his estranged father Kazuya. But if you think the story is too Jin focused, then the second campaign mode might be more to your liking. The character episodes are short 5-battle mini-stories that exist for every fighter on the roster. They all start with a setup for why that character has joined this year's King of the Iron Fist tournament, and end with a full CG cutscene that is often played for laughs. This story mode is much shorter and very light-hearted, but it's a great way for newcomers to try out each character on the roster and learn more about each of them. Lastly, you have Arcade Quest, the most bizarre story mode of the trio. Rather than exist in the world of Tekken, Arcade Quest tells the story of you, the player, someone who is new into Tekken and has been encouraged to start by your friends. You make a custom, Uncanny Valley looking avatar, and then visit several different virtual arcades to play Tekken 8 against other CPU players. It's a really neat idea that makes me think of games like Custom Robo or Mega Man Battle Network in its execution. It's a story mode based around you joining the FGC and working your way to become champion of all the arcades in your region, and then eventually take down this Kazuya looking wannabe to become the Tekken World Champion. It's a really fun concept for a campaign that also seems inspired by ideas found in Pokken, another game by many of the same team, where you pick one specific fighter and go through several themed fights instead of serious ones. Matches where your opponent is just showing off their custom outfit, or a fight where your opponents just try to use this one combo they know over and over again. It adds some neat variety to the single player campaign that very few fighting games have done before. While these are the 3 story modes, they aren't the only modes in the game. There is a traditional arcade mode here for players to experience, as well as local versus and the return of Tekken Ball, a silly mode where you can only hurt your opponent by hitting a ball into them. Super Ghost Battle is a new mode where the CPU learns from the player's replays and attempts to fight you as yourself, which is a fun way to train. Then there's a gallery where you can unlock new images and videos of the characters to enjoy, and a customization section where you can customize both your story mode avatar and each fighter in the game. This is where you spend all the coins that accumulate in the game's various modes, and it allows you to transform each character in your own special way, making them cooler looking, goofier looking, cuter looking, or just trying to reference a character that isn't in the game at all. Overall, on the single player side of things, Tekken 8 is incredibly content rich, and so even if you are not usually a fan of fighting games, I feel comfortable recommending it. So many prior games of this genre from long-running series and new IP have always struggled to keep casual players engaged, and the lack of single-player content is a big part of that. And yet Tekken 8 managed to remedy this without the content feeling pointless or repetitive. Good job, team. But now we move on to the more technical side of Tekken 8, the gameplay. As I'm not someone who is familiar with all the ins and outs of Tekken's mechanics, I'm going to struggle to go into the finer details, like why sidestepping is apparently a lot more viable in this game, and how the snapping of grabs will change approach to combat. But I know no one here expects that from me, and there are some features here that I can talk about, because even to me these are obvious additions to the game. The biggest two being the new heat system and the special style. Tekken 6 introduced Rage, and Tekken 7 added the Rage Art and Rage Drive mechanics that allowed players to potentially make a comeback when they were low on health. Now, Tekken 8 introduces the Heat system, a mechanic that might seem similar to Rage at a cursory glance, but actually adds a lot more depth to the fighting system in ways that aren't immediately apparent. While it does provide some boosts to abilities, Heat is more akin to a stance change than a buff, and the effects it offers changes with every character. For example, putting Elisa into a heat state increases chip damage done on block when using her chainsaws, and grants access to both her emergency dual boot and emergency destruction forms. With Victor you gain access to the Monsieur Samurai move, and several sword attacks are less punishable and do more damage. And Jin gains access to his awakened power stance, with both electric thrusting uppercut and electric wind hook fist being usable without needing the just frame method of input. As you can only use heat once per round, understanding when to use it is vital to strategy, and becoming familiar with your fighter's heat mechanics is very important in competitive play. It's a new layer of complexity to the combat system that gives it a surprising amount of freshness, while also looking very flashy and hype when pulled off successfully. Then there's the special style, which is designed to introduce Tekken to newcomers and help them keep up with more competitive players. This mode simplifies the controls, turning on auto combos and replacing the low kick, low punch, high punch with aerial attacks, low attacks, speciality moves and impact attacks. It's an accessibility feature to try and fix the issue a lot of fighting games have of being too intimidating for newcomers in its complexity. It also helps make the story mode easier to play through. As someone who doesn't play as Jin, this was a good crutch at the game's start to help me get used to him, and then when I felt more comfortable with his playstyle, I took the training wheels off and played more traditionally. It's a great feature, and for those not looking to play competitively, it's a great way to enjoy the single player content without it feeling too difficult or stressful, like many older arcade fighting games did. There's also Tornado, which replaces the previous screw ability found in Tekken 7. This is just a way of flipping opponents up into the air and allowing for air combos that progressively push the player further away. It's a great way to pull off a combo, but it's very similar to screw, so long-time players of Tekken 7 will already be used to this mechanic. And of course, most of the basic Tekken mechanics like sidestepping throws and power crush are all here. There's not a lot to comment on with these unless I get super technical, and it's hard to say how these might change in patch updates later down the line. Like, sidestepping is quite viable as a mechanic right now, but who knows if and how it might get nerfed down the line. That's the thing with competitive fighters, the minute details are always being tweaked and altered, so the devs can try to provide the most balanced and most enjoyable experience for players. Whether they succeed or not, well, we just have to see. We know the developers care a lot about the fighting game community just by the absolutely impressive number of quality of life features that can be found in this game. You have your standard practice mode that provides input monitoring and tutorials/challenges for individual character combos, but then you have these extra mile features that I have just never seen before. The ability to rewatch replays and have the game advise you on where you could have punished your opponent and what combo to use to do so, or highlight where you yourself made a bad move, has turned the game into an easily accessible Tekken tutor for the player. Recommended combos and the in-depth insight into a player's fighting style that the game provides helps new players get a bit more competitive, and the accessibility features like the colorblind options help Tekken 8 reach an entirely new audience. It's rather remarkable, honestly, and worthy of praise. Looking at this all as a non-fighting game player, I think Tekken 8 does a fantastic job at remaining true to its core at being a competitive fighter, while also making itself approachable to a more casual audience. For anyone in the FGC, the game provides a ton of quality of life features that help players learn, and for those starting out Tekken and are interested in getting involved in the competitive community, there's a ton of features to help the player learn. But for those not interested in this side and just want to have a fun, casual single player game, or something to play with when having friends over, the game has a ton of modes that provide hours upon hours of content, something that many fighting games have struggled to provide in the past. When I first played Tekken 8, I was impressed at the few mechanical changes and gameplay feel that evolved since Tekken 7. But now, having spent a lot of time with it, I'm impressed in several different ways, making Tekken 8 a game that I highly recommend. I want to thank Bandai Namco for sending us a copy of this game to review. I am sure it has done them well. I know a lot of fans of Source Gaming are into fighting games, and Tekken 8 in particular, so let me know in the comments down below who your main is. If you aren't into Tekken, or have just wanted to try picking up the series and have been unsure about where to start, let me know as well. I'll do my best to answer any questions that anyone might have down in the comments. On screen right now are our patrons, the $5 up tier. You can learn how to join them by going down to the description below. But if you want to support us in a non-monetary way, there's always that like and subscribe button to press. That will really help us out, but it will also help you out by making it easier to remember to return to the source.